Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am speaking with, now, how do I say this? Because there's a heck of a lot of podcasts to look into here. I'm speaking with Graeme Class, the fantastic and very creative person behind the, shall we say, AI voices of Daily Dad Jokes, Daily Facts, Daily Pro-Life Tips, Get Happy Headlines, Wikipedia Featured Article of the Day, the once daily quiz show, which I'm hoping we're going to get into the conversation, because I used to love that show, and the very, shall we say, help you get tired, and that this podcast will make you sleep. Hey, Graeme, thanks for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Martin. Pleasure.
So that's a heck of a mouthful of podcast.
Yes.
How do you find the time?
And actually, I mean, in the last, I think, last month, I think I've added more to that. And the main reason, and we can talk about that now, and everyone's talking about is the whole chat GPT side of things. And so those podcasts, particularly the Daily Dad Jokes podcast, which is really, I'd call that our flagship sort of AI podcast, which has done okay. And that was before the whole chat GPT side of things. But there were, as you know, AI voices, which are actually pretty good. And I guess in terms of the genesis of the idea, it wasn't actually the first podcast I tried to do with AI. What I found, and maybe you find it as well, I mean, I started to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I was kind of missing the daily kind of news that you'd get from radio, the weather, the finance reports, particularly, just to know, what the Dow Jones or the FTSE is doing, that sort of thing. And I was kind of missing it, really. So I thought, okay, is there a way of automating that? And so it becomes like a podcast feed. And I did create one that was a finance summary of the Dow Jones, FTSE, what price of the Bitcoin, gold, etc. And I was able to automate that with a voice, the same voice, the Bob Jeffy voice, which is on the Daily Dad Jokes podcast. And technically it worked. It was fine. It didn't get a lot of traction, but I thought, there was something there, right?
Yep.
Then I sort of scouted around. I actually found some APIs, which is application programming interfaces, around the COVID time, right? About the COVID stats, the sort of, I guess, morbid fascination with the numbers of who's infected, who's unfortunately passed away. So I sort of did a podcast around that, just showcasing the numbers and not getting into any of the arguments or anything, but just showing data, just providing data on that. And that did all right. That's no longer being published, but that was another kind of proof of concept in my head that these things can actually work. Then I sort of thought, okay, well, what else is there? And I did love comedy. I did like dad jokes. Being a software engineering background, I thought, okay, well, let's try this with dad jokes. And as many of the listeners would know, Reddit has a dad jokes subreddit, they call it. Reddit does have an API that you can hook into. So I thought, okay, we've got the jokes. Now, how can we sort of package it up into something that is palatable? And you and perhaps some of your listeners may be familiar with the comedic stylings of Mitch Hedberg and what's the other one? There's an Australian comedian called Elliot Goblet. Very monotone, very just matter of fact type humor. And so I thought, okay, well, that kind of lends to the AI voice. So then I decided to put it into a comedy sort of setting, put some laughing in it, and kind of, morphed it into what it is today. And the format's pretty much stayed the same for now. I started late 2020, produced over 1,000 episodes so far. Haven't missed a day yet.
Yeah.
And over 10,000 jokes delivered. So it's it is an interesting story, and I'm just as surprised as anyone really of how far it's come. Yeah.
Well, so far that you've got Kurtwood Smith shouted its praises.
Yeah, so that was good as well. A little bit of story, I guess, behind that. I think the middle of last year, I sort of had an idea. I mean, perhaps some celebrities or comedians would like to tell their own dad jokes, and they can chuck it on our podcast, and they can promote whatever project they've got on. We had some mixed results with that, but Kurtwood's definitely like the best one we've got so far. And so he's done an episode on his favorite dad jokes, which is really, he's got such a distinct voice.
Yeah.
And I was a fan of that 70s show as well, so it was a real pleasure to have him sort of record an episode. As we all like to know, he's the Red Foreman character from that 70s show, and now he's got that 90s show, which actually got renewed for a second season, it's actually not a bad show. It's actually, I'd recommend it.
For anybody listening that's into Star Trek Connection as well, he's in Star Trek Voyager as a bad guy.
That's right.
In the fantastic two-parter, The Year of Hell. Yep.
He was also in RoboCop as well.
Yes.
Right, yes.
Classic film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, was he one of the creators of Ed 109 or whatever it is?
I don't know.
Well, Ed 209
do some Googling. But anyway.
That's for you all out there to find out.
Yes.
To get back to us. So what's your history with AI? Have you got history because of being a computer programmer? Had you already been experimenting with AI in work?
Yeah, so I've been experimenting really for the last, 2-3 years, more around the machine learning side of it, really just dabbling in it, not really putting anything into production. But I have been coding since I was 16 and been doing that off and on, pretty much self-taught. I did engineering, electronic engineering, but then soon after that, didn't find a lot of jobs in that area. So I just sort of moved into software development, software engineering, had some businesses around that, providing consulting services to businesses. So, I've been in that game for quite a while, and it's just nice to I actually find it quite mentally stimulating. Coding. I encourage anyone, to continue doing it if you have some inkling of doing it, or to start doing it. It's hopefully keeping my brain active, and it'll help me in the later years of my life.
Well, it's the strangest thing because, AI is the thing at the moment. It's just out there to the degree that I don't know how many people know this. So when I do my listening, I'm at work in a van. And so I'm constantly in touch with, other AI is available. So my iPhone is, you've got Siri on there. And I find myself, for some strange reason, I'll be there getting Siri to do like messages for me to my other half. I'll send text messages and get Siri and I'll speak it. And then when I've finished and it's finished and told me the message sent, I find myself thanking this not person, but it's almost natural that you respond to it because it's so almost human in its way. Especially the Montgomery character that you've got and these other characters, and they've got that sort of feel to them. It's not a disembodied voice in a sense.
it's interesting you say that, because we've got a couple of Google Assistants devices in our house, and our kids. It's funny because we actually encourage them to say, "Please, can you? What's the weather today?" Sort of thing. And also, there's been some memes out there about ChatGPT, and everyone's being polite to it just in case they become our overlords, and at least they'll remember you being polite to them. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, AI. I mean, to me, it's just really just a continuum of I guess, not to get too far, but like really from the birth of the semiconductor, really just through to the information age, through the automation, through to now to AI, and I think it's a great thing for humankind. As with any technology, I think it's you have to be wise, and you have to be have some philosophy around it, and when should you use it, when you should not, and that's up to individuals. I think I do believe in the power of the individual and the power of the human ethos to collectively do the right thing. However, we are in a chaotic period, and it's really fascinating, and I'm really happy to be sort of in the mix, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way from. It's strange because only the other day I was speaking with somebody and saying to them at work that when I was younger, I worked for a newspaper. And so what we were working with in the computer department there, and we're talking the mid-80s here, was they had Amstrad computers writing the actual journalistic, the actual reports. And then we used very early Apple Macs to do the actual publish, the whatever they call it. The one that puts the newspaper together.
The layout.
Yeah, that does all the layout. And I said that it was difficult for us because back then, these computers did not in any way work with each other. You could not get them to connect or do anything because they were completely different languages. And this is the early days. But where I'm going to with this is such as a database, for instance, and all these other softwares. Back then, you actually, even with the software, you actually had to get into the programming to program the layouts and this, that, and the other. But over the years, because of how advanced software has got, that's automated in a sense where you can just go there and you can go click, click, click. This is how I want it to look, and it's done. You don't have to go through all the programming side of it now. So this is just an extension where now you can just talk to an AI and say, I want this, 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 and this, and it will do it for you. There's none of this even going to a keyboard nowadays in some businesses.
Yeah, and I've used ChatGPT for improving some of my code. I was able to reduce a couple of hundred lines of code into one line. I kind of had the idea, so I knew what to ask.
Yeah.
But it helped me. On the flip side, I've seen it produce erroneous code, and it didn't work. So that's with the ChatGPT, the free version. Whether the new one, the ChatGPT 4, is going to be any better, I don't know. I haven't tried it yet. So yeah, that's just been my experience so far. And again, it's, as you say, I think it's the evolution of how we're going to be doing things from now on.
Absolutely. We're going to go ahead quite a bit in the list because
okay, sure.
So I'm going now to basically to items 10 and 11, shall we say, on the list. So the future of AI and the AI debate. Now, very, very recently, in the news, it's come to a few people have noticed, or it's been reported that AI is being used in the world of music now and in the world of arts. So in art itself, like paintings, pictures, people are getting AI to create artwork, and then they will say, oh, this is artwork that I've designed. And this is where we're going with the debate, because you can sort of say, well, did you, or did the actual software create the artwork? And the same goes for music, where people are doing, there's a fantastic one, or there's some superb ones coming out where they've got a younger Paul McCartney, for instance. They've got his voice as an AI replacing his older voice. So you've got Paul McCartney from the 60s and 70s voice, basically replacing his 2000s and 2010s and now 2020s voice. So what do you think about the debate of the use of these?
Yeah, just as you're saying that about the Paul McCartney scenario, which I hadn't actually heard before.
Okay.
I remember, I think it was early 90s. There was a song by Natalie Cole with sounds from her father, Nat King Cole.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember that, right?
I do.
Unforgettable, right? And it was his classic song, and she superimposed, and even the film clip sort of superimposed him singing it with her, right?
Yep.
And there was a little bit of debate then, like, should you really dredge up the past? And I think that's similar to what we're talking about.
Yep.
I don't like the fact that you can fake it. Like in that case, okay, that it's Paul McCartney, it's the same person, it's a younger person. I don't like the fact that you can deep fake someone and then pass it off as someone else, or saying that they endorse this song that they're in. Okay. What I do believe is that all the AI is, in my mind, is if someone had 1 billion years to learn all the music, right, and come up with some mash, right? I mean, that Elvis took inspiration from blues and African American type music, and sort of blended his own side of things into it. So I think AI will be that, meshing in and creating something new. So it's promising. I haven't experimented with any of the music. I am keeping an eye on it because I think it'll be very useful for possibly some of my podcasts, if I have to add, say, sound effects or music to match what's been talking about in terms of mood, etc. But I don't like the whole deep fake side of things that actually dupe people. Yeah.
I mean, there's another one as well where a rock band, they created an entire album of new songs, and then they've used AI to put Liam Gallagher from Oasis as the lead singer. And Liam Gallagher actually responded to it and says, "Oh, I like it." So
okay,
it's a completely different thing then, I suppose. But
that's right.
But eventually, I don't think we'll be seeing Elvis Presley's voice doing any Public Enemy numbers anytime in the future.
Well, you never know, because I think the estate is was nearly bankrupt at one stage. So perhaps Priscilla Presley is trying to look for other avenues to monetize the King.
Yeah. We'll be seeing him doing a duet with Tupac anytime soon. So we've already done your history with AI and sort of the podcast history as well. So how did you go about creating the shows?
So I guess from the genesis of a podcast, it really starts with the idea of a topic. Usually it's something I'm interested in. For example, kind of, don't tell anyone this, please, but I'm just sort of thinking about, I'm interested in business.
Yep.
I've never done an MBA. So what would an MBA type podcast look like, right? And you go through all the topics of an MBA, right? So I'm kind of thinking about that. So to take you through my thought process, I'd look at some of the topics that you could get from an MBA, and then I would say, okay, ChatGPT, can you tell me some information about these topics, right? And then I think, okay, well, then I can put it into a podcast form, right? And it might be useful. I mean, I'd listen to it, right? I'd listen to it, just for my own knowledge. Go through accounting principles, strategy, entrepreneurship, all sorts of things. The other one which I've just been working on is around historical figures, the most influential people in history. That one's I had to gather. I asked sort of ChatGPT who are the most influential people ever in history. It gave a list. I thought I needed a little bit more. So I'm not sure if you ever played a game called Civilization, right?
Yeah.
And in Civilization, they've actually done a lot of the work. They actually, in the game, these great people spawn which are from history. So I found, those people, the leaders that are in that game. It's a wonderful game, actually, just in terms of strategy and learning about history, and it's really good because I don't have fast reflexes now. It's turn-based, so that's all good. And then, so I just use that information, then that becomes the genesis of a podcast. So we just talk about a significant person in history, and in a sort of a 3 to 5 minute episode. So just gives a flavour of that person and what they achieved. In terms of the technical side of things, I'm lucky enough on the Megaphone podcasting platform that many of the listeners may be aware. They've got an API. I code in my language, for the techies out there, is in C#. So I code it up. I use the APIs. I publish, and it's kind of all automated. So that's kind of a real quick overview of how I approach it. And so I've been able to get it. The quickest I've ever had to turn around was the Life Pro Tips one.
Yep.
So I was able to turn from, I've been thinking about it, but from the time I decided to do it to the time I was able to publish was 9 hours. So
wow.
Yeah, so I was able to, and that's the outlier. That's the record. So 9 hours. Then I had a daily established automated routine to publish something every day. So, and it's fascinating, and it's just, as I said, it's a very much a mental stimulation, and it keeps my brain occupied. That's for sure.
So. First of all, I only got as far as C++, so I haven't gone any further than that.
Well, I take my hat off to you, because that's a difficult language.
It is. And what was I going to say then? I was going to say, so when you record the show, is it programmed in, or do you actually speak yourself, and then it AIs what you've said with the inflections that you put in?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't include that in my overview. So I use just generic, just off the shelf type AI voices, right? Yep. They're available from Amazon Web Services and also Microsoft Azure. So I use those voices. I play around with the pitch a little bit, but by and large, I just use that. The cloning technology, the open source projects, I've had a little bit of a dabble with. I haven't had much success in that. The quality is not quite there in terms of pronunciations, things like that. So it'll get there, and I'll probably clone my voice. I'll clone your voice if you want, and it'll be at a. It's not quite, I find, at the par of what you can get from the Microsofts and the Amazon web, right now.
Yep. But and so. How do you then choose? I've got it down here in parentheses. Yeah. How do you choose the presenters for each show? Is there a specific, so you create a show and you think which one of these voices would suit this show, and then you end up creating new ones as well? I mean, you've got a couple of lady
Yeah.
presenters and a couple of
Yes.
male presenters.
Yeah. So that's basically, if I like the voice, they become part of the podcast network, podcast universe, I guess you could say. And I just use them because I like their voice. There's no real reason to it. I wanted some females just to balance things out, especially within a podcast. You don't want to hear the same voice all the time. That's basically it.
And then the Get Happy headlines, you've got 3 voices.
Yes. Yeah. So that one's an interesting one because I'm actually working with partnered with a producer who is in New York, and with one of her colleagues. So that one was around. They wanted, and they pitched this, and they're running with it, which is really good. They wanted something around news that was in a positive light. They wanted to try it with some characters, some AI characters, and that's how that was born. So that one's a little bit more manual in terms of the research of the news, the scripting and everything like that. So that's a good experiment that we're running, and it's been going for 15 episodes, and it's slowly building.
Yep. So that's you. So the other shows that we've mentioned, they're all directly from you, are they? And that one's just the first.
Yes, that one's and then the Get Happy headlines is with like a partnership with my producer, and the daily quiz show is one that I do together with my brother. So that one, we came up with the idea of doing a quiz podcast. We wanted to use the same voices, and then it was just a matter of trying to find a database of quizzes, of questions and answers. So we're able to find that in a nice format. Again, through coding, extracted it, did some stuff, and then put it out there. We only had enough content, I think, for a year, and it's just now we're trying to figure out what the next step is with that. I know you've been hanging out for the next version.
I have.
We're trying to we're planning, but we haven't put into play yet. Like a kind of like an iconic album type quiz, like your White Album, Sgt. Pepper's. I mean, I'm just talking Beatles here, but a whole gamut of albums and trivia associated with those albums. He's a big music fan,
right?
So together we'll work on something.
I was about to come out with a really bad pun then and say, the Beatles say we can work it out. Dear me. So is there any editing involved, or do you just program in the script essentially and then leave it to it? Or do you have to occasionally like clip bits or extend bits to make more of a pause and things like that?
No, basically. So once I've got the code, which is effectively like the template for a show, I stick with that. So it does take a little bit of iteration and work to get it to a point where I'm kind of happy. I'm very much biased to publishing and just get it out there. So I try not to be too perfectionist, and then I can adjust over time based on something I hear or some feedback, etc. So that's the way I do it. So there's no real editing. The only editing I do is the Daily Dad Jokes podcast. Every fortnight we have a fan episode. Yeah. So they call into a voicemail, they put their joke in, and then we wrap that up and put out as an episode, which is quite fun actually. You hear all the different voices from around the world, and predominantly US. We get a lot of US callers, a couple of UK, a couple of Australians, one New Zealander. So it's that's a really good that at the first, and you might have experienced this yourself. once you start getting people actually calling in and actually respond, talking about your show and communicating with you, that feels more real. You're not sort of blasting out into the ether.
Yeah, I've found that it reminds me of the old days of when I used to be in bands and when I used to play on stage, and I used to get a thrill from people singing back songs that I'd actually written, and it's the same sort of feeling.
Yep, absolutely.
So, but I mean, it's not just voices. You've got a sound mix there as well. So you've got background sounds as well in there as well. So you've done really well at mixing those together as well.
Yeah, so that's all programmatic as well. So that's all, like I say, I know the beats of where this should be played, where that should be played, and that's the template really. And I just go with that. Yeah.
Right. So, and then the facts checks, how do you do that? Is it you look on Reddit and then you just double check that those facts are right?
Yeah. So the daily facts, so that comes from another API, not from Reddit, and it's just a list of facts, right?
Yeah.
So initially I go, okay, that's pretty cool. And then I created a sort of bit of a spiel using ChatGPT. This is through the ChatGPT API. So it's all automatic. And then I discovered, I actually was looking and I said, that's actually not true, one of those things. And then I actually put into ChatGPT, is this fact true? Yeah. And they say, no, it's not, right?
Yep.
So I'm kind of using knowledge or facts from one area, asking ChatGPT, is this true?
Yep.
If it's true, okay, then explain more. If it's not, then reject it. Just don't worry. Now, that begs the question, is ChatGPT correct? Right?
Yeah.
So, there's a email associated with the podcast. If people ever have any issues with any of the facts, they can email in. I can correct it. That's obviously a manual. That will be a manual process to do that. So,
yeah. And the jokes, we've already explained that you get those from the Daily Dad Jokes Reddit. Show choices. Yeah. How have you picked? So each level that you've gone, so you started with whatever it was before, the one about the money and finance and things like that, and then you went to the dad jokes. And then, so what made you decide each stage to actually choose that? Is it just basically that you saw an opening there where it was needed and you thought a niche that needs covering?
It's more, I guess, my personal interest.
Yep.
Coupled with how easy can I get the information? Coupled with how easy can I automatically produce a podcast? Because there's a few criteria in my head that I actually had before embarking on these AI podcasts. One was I didn't want a microphone. So this microphone you see here, I only got that like a month ago, right? Okay. I purposely did that so that I wouldn't be tempted to actually do the traditional podcast route. The second one had to be automatic, right? I knew myself, and as you know, it's very hard to keep a consistent schedule. Father of 3 kids. At the time, I was working full time. I wanted to get into the podcasting game, but I just really wanted to have something consistent. I didn't want to have the pod fade. No more episodes after seven episodes type of thing, right? So I knew myself. I knew there might be a way of automating it. So that was that. And the third one, I wanted it as close to $0 as possible per month that I had to pay to do it. And I managed to sort of tick those boxes, and having those constraints actually made me more creative. If that's a bit counterintuitive, but it actually made me more creative. So to answer your original question in terms of how do I decide what the next podcast is, it really it's a random. I've got a running list of things that just come into my head, and I just jot them down, when it's time for the next podcast to be done, then I pull it up, and go from there.
Because there's a good wealth of different types of show. I mean, for the most part, they are in that sweet spot of the under 10 minutes shows. With the only outlier of that being what is it? This podcast will make you sleep. That's the only outlier, because that one is supposed to be long because it's supposed to put you to sleep.
Put you to sleep.
Put you to sleep. Yeah, which is a shall I say? Which is a weird thing to listen to when you're trying to listen to it, just normally as somebody like me, not wanting to go to sleep and just listening to, oh, what's this podcast like? It's strange because it's a lot. It's like just words there, but it's more the meter of how those words are spoken that is supposed to put you into a relaxed, calm mood and put you to sleep. Really, it's yeah.
So that was an idea I had, because I don't know about you. Do you listen to podcasts as you sleep?
I have, but very rarely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have got into, maybe it's a bad habit, to having something like a podcast running until I fall asleep. And I was talking to a few of my friends. They do something similar. Could be music, but sometimes it's podcast. But what really used to annoy me was that I'd fall asleep and then I missed the content, and then I have to go back and find out, okay, where did I actually fall asleep, and listen to it and all that. So I thought, why can't I just create something that's a bit nonsensical? You're not really invested in the plot, but it's something that is just there and talking, and then you just go to sleep and you don't care if you don't hear the rest of it. So that was the genesis of that.
Yeah, because I've done that before when I've been listening to something and I've thought, I'll put this on in the background to listen to so I can fall, or just to be in the background to fall asleep with. And then I find myself getting too invested in the conversation or something. Oh, that's an interesting. And then you get invested and you can't fall asleep because you really want to know how the conversation goes.
Yeah, that's right.
But, so standout moments. Are there any standout moments? I mean, I would have thought that one of the standouts, like you've mentioned, would be Kurtwood wanting to do a dad jokes episode, and then the great catch of him that you've got where you can use Kurtwood's voice bit that he's recorded as a promo now for the show.
Yeah.
So any more standouts like that?
Yeah, I think that was one. I guess the original standout was when we got caught up in the Spotify algorithm. So that's where the growth came up. So I was just producing it. I wasn't really monitoring it. It was just kind of there. And then all of a sudden my kids said, I think I saw a podcast being recommended on my Spotify app. And I sort of had to look, and then started to see the followers sort of creep up and the number of players, and and then so that was kind of the standout moment where we kind of got caught up in the algorithm, and it got that initial bump. I guess from a business point of view, on the standout side of things, just this week, iHeartMedia announced that they're basically, we're partnering with iHeartMedia on the Daily Dad Jokes podcast. So you'll notice now that on the podcast feed, there will be an iHeartMedia logo, and at iHeartMedia, it's published by iHeartMedia. So that was, I guess, a standout moment from a business side of things. I mean, it's and it was interesting because it's the first time they're sort of going into this AI mode of things. So that was from a business point of view, and to a putting food on the table point of view for the family, it was quite a pleasant surprise. And as I said before, I'm just as surprised as anyone that people actually want to listen to these AI voices.
But I mean, another interesting one is, and this should hopefully make you happy as well, is that I had I had a couple of people from a podcast called DIY for Business on my show a couple of years ago. So this is towards when Daily Dad Jokes would have been early on in its in its infancy, essentially. And even to this day, when I was explaining to one of those people, shout out to Russ from that show, and I said to him, I said, "Oh, I'm going to talk to Graeme, who Graeme Class, who creates this show, and Daily Dad Jokes, and this that, and the." And he said to me, he said, "Do you know what?" He says, "All this time, I actually thought that Bob Jeffrey was a person."
Yeah, and it's interesting that, and there's I'm not sure if you or your listeners are aware, there's a concept called the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Where this is particularly for AI vision of an AI constructed human, and it kind of like looks weird. It looks human, but your brain says something's not quite right there. That's the uncanny valley. I think there's something like that in audio, because some people detect that it's AI, and some people don't. So when people call into the podcast, sorry, to the voicemail for the fan episode, they say, "Hey Bob, how's it going? Love you," that sort of thing. So, it is just interesting that some people can detect it and some people can't. I think of him as just like a animated or a character, that is a persona that is of a comedian that is being played, and I just think it's fascinating, and there's something to it that people can detect and some people can't.
Yeah. I mean, I've sort of noticed it every now and again. I'll notice little bits, and I'll think, right, that's not how a real person would possibly put that. But that's just me. Some people will not notice that, because to some people it's in the background and it's just like, oh yeah, that's funny, and this and the other, and they won't notice those little bits. But it's the fact that AI voices and that have got to that sort of stage now where you can actually catch people out now, and people will not know, and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't realize. I thought that was a real person." And it's at that level now where you can do that. I mean, I mentioned earlier on, I find that with Montgomery Jones, that character, I'll listen to him and I'll think, that is so close to perfection.
Yes.
It is impressive. It is really impressive. That voice itself is impressive.
Yeah. So that's why you will notice a lot of the new podcasts coming up will feature him. And and the names themselves, they just come to me in a few seconds usually, and then
the one that makes me laugh the most is Ali McNally.
Ali. I didn't come up with that one, but
That's Get Happy headlines, by the way, everybody.
That's the Get Happy one. Yeah. No, that's good.
But oh dear, we've gone through that. We've gone through all that lot really quickly. All these points. I'm not sure where to go now.
Podcast advice.
So, what advice would you give to people then starting a podcast?
I would say I can answer it by going through how I kind of started. And I read like a lot of articles. All right, the average length of a podcast should be 20 to 30 minutes because that's the average travel time of people. You should be as authentic as possible because you're trying to connect with your audience, right? I threw both those things out the window. Right. It was short. It was at the start, Daily Dad Jokes was like 3 minutes, 4 minutes max. Now it's sort of going up to 5-6 minutes. But that was one that I threw out. And then the authenticity, I mean, I'm using an AI voice. I'll be honest, that's not authentic. It sounds authentic, but it's not. It's actually not. It's not my voice. It's not a human voice, right? So when you're starting off with podcasts, don't be afraid to try something new because everyone's trying to do the old way, or not the old way, doing a way that's worked in the past. You never know, something may work in the future. So the other thing was you may find some advice that says follow your passions, right?
Yep.
I somewhat disagree with that. Follow your interests, but make sure it's sustainable. Okay, passions like love can dissipate in an instant, right? Find something you're interested in. Find something that's sustainable, that you can consistently produce. Okay. Figure out your day schedule. Figure out your life, when you can do it. You know, are you going to get interrupted by your kids? You know, when it's those little minutiae of things that, you know, you've experienced quite a lot, Martin, and it's not sexy, but it's the reality of, if you want something to be done, you have to get the consistency, the habits in force.
Absolutely. I did miss putting on there the logos. How do you select the logos for each show?
So my brother is a graphic designer, so I sometimes get him to do it. I've been using DALL-E quite a bit. I've done a little bit of graphic design in the past, just self-taught. Basically that's it. Usually, you know, I'll try and come up with something relatively quickly. Again, I'm always biased to publish, so I'm always biased to just chuck something up there. If it doesn't quite work or I need to tweak, you can just update the logo again. Usually at the start, no one's listening, no one's viewing it. You know, you just do it.
So here we go. Do you know what? I'm just thinking. So there was a moment then, was there, where it had steady numbers. So, but I'm going to the daily dad jokes here because, like you said, that's the flagship. Yep. That's the flagship that everybody, you know, looks at. But I think everybody needs to check all the other shows out as well, because they're all really good quality shows. But daily dad jokes, there was where it was at a steady level. Did you suddenly get a spike, and that's where it suddenly went whoosh, and it went to this level at a certain point?
Yeah, I'm going to draw it with my hand, but I'll try and describe it. So it was sort of linearly going up, and then there was a point of inflection up, which looked exponential, and then it became like the classic S curve. So it sort of went up,
leveling off,
and then it kind of leveled off, and slowly, just sort of slowly going up from there. That's where I say that point of inflection. That's when we got caught up in the algorithm, the Spotify algorithm, and that's when it sort of took off. Yeah.
So where can people find you and get hold of you then, Graeme?
Yeah, so the best way is my website is classicstudios.com. That's with a K, so KLASSIC Studios. Or you can just email me, podcast@classicstudios.com. You can also, the social media stuff, I'm not that active. You can search for Daily Dad Jokes on Instagram. That's probably where I'm the most active. That's where we communicate, Martin. Yeah. So classicstudios.com, podcast@classicstudios.com, or just search for Daily Dad Jokes podcast on Instagram.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. You can find Pods Like Us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you for speaking with me today, Graeme.
No problem, Martin. Anytime.
Great. And thank you, everyone, for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.